Communism. We've all heard this word before, but do we actually know what it... Hold on, wait a second. I feel like I already made this video before. Oh, yeah, now I remember. I made a video on the basics of communism and Marxism. But that was the only idea I had left. What in the world am I supposed to do now? Oh, I know. I could explore different forms communism has taken throughout the years and make it into a series where I try to explain it simply. Oh my god, wait, I'm such a genius. Well, what better place to start than Marxist-Leninism? Now, from the name, you can probably assume that in order to fully grasp this topic, then you probably need some basic understanding on what communism and Marxism are. Well, I have some good news for you, because I have a video just about that, and I recommend you watch it before watching this. But a quick recap is communism is when the state, aka the people, own the means of production, there's no government, and everyone is equal. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels thought that this would manifest itself in the world through a proletarian revolution because of capitalism. Now, Marxism is the idealistic version of this ideology, and could never work because of our human nature of always wanting more. But then Vladimir Lenin came in and was like, screw what the people say, I'ma make communism work. What we have to understand is that capitalism looked a whole lot different than it does now. The workers were working 10, 11-hour days with no benefits and meager pay, working jobs that were devoid of all meaning, and all this to make the bourgeoisie richer. Even though Russia was mostly a feudalist nation in the early 20th century, capitalism started to slowly creep up on Russia, and with an incompetent leader who made poor decisions which only kept the rich in mind, that being Tsar Nicholas II, Lenin knew it was time for a revolution. He and his Bolsheviks one day set up a coup d'etat, which would later be known as the October Revolution, overthrowing the king, and just like that, Lenin was the ruler of Russia. Believe it or not, this revolution was fairly small, and Lenin, the cutie himself, didn't think that this was the revolution that would demolish capitalism and bring socialism into the mainstream all around the world. He thought that that revolution would take place in Germany, as they were the economic powerhouse and had the most developed system of capitalism. That is why Lenin took it upon himself to educate the people, so they'd be ready for the revolution, and that's basically the whole point of Marxist-Leninism. Marxist-Leninism is an incorporation of communism in a country. This was done by using authoritarian socialism, which is just another way of saying Marxist-Leninism, where there is only one party in the government, and the person on top holds a majority of the power. Now, this of course isn't one of the smartest ideas that Lenin ever had, because it kind of may have just a little bit backfired on the long run, because of the centralization of power. But along with this, another core idea of Leninism was democratic centralism. All this means is that for everybody to come to a decision in the government, everybody should debate about what they think would be the right thing, and when the party comes to the conclusion, then the minority can still keep their opinion, but they have to shut the hell up about it and accept the outcome, or they'd be expelled from the party. Now, there's this thing known as the dictatorship of the proletariat, which was, well, I think you can already assume from the title. It's meant that the proletariat would hold all the power and the pesky bourgeoisie would hold none of it. In this sense, the proletariat, of course, didn't hold all the power, just some political power. This is sort of like an intermediate state between capitalism and communism, as the government doesn't hold all the power. The reason why they couldn't just become a completely communistic nation was because of how radical the idea was. They needed to fight for this, as it wasn't just going to be handed to them, and this was a means of insinuating the revolution of the total fall of capitalism. Speaking on this note, Leninism also has this vanguard party, which is made up of a bunch of smart and educated people, and their job was to inform the public and make them smart. Now, of course, this is another prime example of Lenin preparing the people not just for communism, but also for the aforementioned revolution that Lenin thought would be taking place in Germany. He thought that people needed to familiarize themselves with socialism so they could side with the proletariat, in order for this movement to take off and for communism to become not just a dream, but a reality. But before Lenin could, actually fully take control of Russia, he had to go through a couple of challenges initially. As expected, doing a coup and taking over the once monarchical empire and reforming it into a communistic one could ruffle a few feathers, as one might imagine. Due to this, the Russian Civil War broke out in 1917 when Lenin took over office, and it lasted about 5 years. What it boiled down to was that the White Army did not like the Bolsheviks and wanted the country to not be communistic and have a return to form. And yeah, that's really it. The Bolsheviks, of course, wound on top because they had the savage Vladimir Lenin, and because they instilled policies that would support their troops and had a much bigger army. Once the Whites were beaten, Lenin became the leader of Russia and established the Soviet Union, which he was also the leader of, and only like 1.5 million people died, so it was pretty worth it. Lenin had two main economic policies in place during his rule, the first of them being war communism. War communism was put into place to further spread socialist ideas, and as a kind of improvisation in the face of serious emergency, that being the Russian Civil War. This plan tried to nationalize a whole bunch of industries, have extreme centralization, have the state be the sole distributor and sole producer, and abolish money. Now, this was essentially a disaster, as by 1920, the average worker productivity rate, which was less than 44% of the one in 1913. Now, this was due to many reasons, such as bad management, no desire to do better, and a huge-ass famine. The Russian government had farmers make a certain amount of food to feed themselves, and when they hit that quota, then they would take the rest away. They couldn't sell it as surplus, and the food would go to the Bolshevik army and the rest of the people of Russia. This would lead to disaster, as farmers only made the bare minimum, meaning not enough food to go around, as a protest to the government, which kind of doesn't make sense, because, then you wouldn't be able to feed yourself, but, okay, to each their own, I guess. This led many other people to become farmers, as there wasn't enough food, so that would leave the other industries struggling, as they'd suffer and loss of workers, and there still wasn't enough food, so it wasn't really working out. Also, protests became very common for abolishing the system, but these ended how many other protests end, with authoritarian governments: death. However, once the White Army was defeated, then Lenin could come up with, some could say, a new economic policy. Funnily enough, it was called the New Economic Policy. Now, isn't that just an LMAO moment? His policy was a relapse from socialism back to capitalism. Well, kind of. The government still owned the big major industries, but the normal people, like farmers, were allowed to farm and sell their own food, and factories were able to sell their goods in a somewhat open market. This doesn't sound like the communistic society that Marx had envisioned, because it wasn't. When faced with famine and rebellion, Lenin knew that he had to take a step backwards as to reorganize and come back booming and better than ever. And the result of this were actually a success. Russia saw a great increase in the production of food and many other materials, workers got better treatment, and the people gained more freedom, at least temporarily. This economic system ended in 1928, a couple of years after Lenin's death, when the big brute Stalin himself came into power and did a very great job with his 5-year plan. All in all, Lenin is probably one of the most influential people in the history of the world. He showed that socialism could manifest itself in a country, and that eventually, maybe one day, communism could work as well. It didn't need to be just a dream anymore, it could become a reality. Along with this, he influenced many other countries, even modern ones, and his ideas were the gateway to many others, which would lead to some good, some bad. Mostly bad though. People have different opinions on their view on Lenin. Some see him as a hero, some as a villain. And this is, frankly, up to you to decide.